So, what's on the docket for today?
Roger that. So, Cuphead is this indie game that feels like it's been in development for—
What?
Hey, listen! Hey, listen! Hey, listen! 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 Listen!
Trash Common here, and before I begin, yes, I am aware that Just a Robot did cover the same video on Halloween, but I do think I can add a few other things to the video. I will have his video in the description, and I do suggest that you all check out his channel. So, we're covering Moviebob, and if you're familiar with the whole Gamergate thing, then that name probably sounds familiar. But anyway, enough about that, let's talk about Cuphead, and how you shouldn't make a deal with the— oh, you know, that's actually kind of ironic in retrospect.
Here's a real high-class bout.
Well, the controversy isn't actually about Cuphead. Everyone is still pretty much on board with Cuphead looking like a potentially really good game, and the early word is still pretty solid. What happened was that a games journalist posted a funny video of himself playing the game at Gamescom in Germany, and kinda sucking at it. Kind of a non-story, really.
I would like to point out that the lack of details that Moviebob here is presenting. You see, when it comes to these sorts of things, details are key in determining what factors there are in the actual event that's being discussed. However, because he's not providing the full context, hell, even looking at in Moviebob's description, we can see that he doesn't have anything related to it.
Ladies and gentlemen, the budget just ran out. So
just him shilling out everything that has his bearded face slapped onto it, it allows the presenter to manipulate anyone who's not in the know of the information, since it also allows the presenter to show whatever information that they want in order to strengthen their case. Especially when it's around controversy, that's something that you need to do. You need to show your information. So since Bob's being a bit too lazy, let me be the one to fill you guys in. The reviewer in question is Dean Takahashi, a 25-year veteran in tech journalism, and has about 18 years of gaming journalism under his belt. And I'll be writing a link as to how he failed in Cuphead. But who is Dean Takahashi? Well, let's look to an article that gives a bit more insight on who he is. From BeyondGaming.net, it lists a few of his exploits, and the infamous review that he's known for as Mass Effect. Why Mass Effect falls short of its hype is also mentioned in here. The review has long been deleted, but if you know what they say, the internet never forgets. And there's an archived version of it if you want to read it. There are a few things about that, but one thing to note is that it was later revealed that Dean had skipped the tutorial of Mass Effect and had gotten far into the game without assigning any skill points of his characters. And this was mentioned in an article that he himself wrote right after this review. He failed to realize that the game had RPG elements to it, and that there were mechanics that he got completely wrong, and like I said, he even admitted to that it was his fault and not the fault of the game. And this wasn't the first time he's pulled it either. He did the same thing with XCOM 2. And that's vital information for your everyday life to consider in this situation, as we now have a background about the person who Moviebob decided to leave nameless, effectively leaving the audience in the dark. Also, no, you blatant ripoff of Navi, it wasn't just a funny video, there was an actual article that accompanied it. And guess what? You can interpret it as criticism about the game, since it does give the impression of critiquing the game on its first go. Here, let me look at the article in one of his criticisms, where he claims that he died by jumping into the forest canopy. So I decided to look for that scene in his gameplay, which was at the end.
Yeah, really kill him! Please!
I'm okay. I just got the wind knocked out of me.
Fight choreography by Dom DeLuise.
Come on, we didn't like these scenes the first time!
Yeah.
Well, it's hardly worth it, but boo!
Obviously it wasn't the canopy, because he had jumped up there beforehand. If you bothered to actually pay attention to the level, you'd realize there are flower-based enemies who fall from the sky. It's a critique that he gave in the article accompanying the video, and to me, I believe it's a false critique since that was due to his lack of observing the game.
But then some guy with a buttload of social media followers and apparently a surplus of whatever gamer culture credibility means in 2017.
Probably nothing good, I assure you.
Ian Miles Chong. There's that selectivity in information again.
Your knowledge of the land shall be great.
Made an edit from only all the worst gameplay mistakes from the original video and posted it to make some kind of point about games journalism that I honestly don't grasp the full intent behind.
Of course he edited it so it could be on Twitter. While he did edit it so it could be seen on Twitter, anyone who has seen the original would see that Dean Takahashi wasn't able to grasp simple instructions from the tutorial and spent the rest of the 26-minute video not being able to get past the first run and gun section of the game. Hell, if we look towards Dean's own words, he says this.
I didn't realize for quite a long time you don't accomplish anything by jumping on top of an enemy, like in the Mario games. Rather you lose a life.
Frankly, if you try to jump on an enemy and you realize, oh, I can't hurt it by jumping on it, I would think that would be pretty obvious to figure out in the first go. In addition, the tutorial in the game doesn't mention anything about being able to jump on enemies at all. The closest you could say is maybe parrying attacks, but it only works on pink items and enemies. And this is apparent if you bother to actually watch the video. But really, this goes back to the tutorial. Not once did the tutorial mention anything about jumping on enemies, which is actually kind of common in a run-and-gun game. Mega Man didn't allow you to jump on enemies to kill them. You try that, and most of the time you take damage. I mean, I don't understand how you can say this when you can actually see the video and it proves you wrong.
Well, I imagine the point was that being bad at a game is proof that games journalists in the elite mainstream media don't know enough about their own medium and therefore don't deserve as much credibility as the true devoted gaming voices of the populous new media.
Which refers to who?
Mostly guys shrieking ironically racist obscenities at PUBG and pretending to be frightened by what's basically the Tim and Eric version of Night Trap.
Ah.
Okay, I was kind of with you until that last bit.
Also, I kind of find it a bit weird that you'd mention that point. Please point to me to the people who are saying this kind of thing. From what I understand, most people are just looking for competency in gaming.
Oh, but Carmen, don't you know? You don't need to be skilled in something to give your opinion on it. You don't need to be a 5-star chef to say something is trash once you eat it.
Irony! Alright, so FYI, Bob actually goes in this a bit more detailed in the video, so I'll give my thoughts there.
And the writer of this was a 25-year veteran of technology journalism, almost as long as that covering games as well, right?
I believe that was the case, yeah.
And he doesn't know enough about video games?
That would seem to be the insinuation.
Then don't you think that should have raised a few red flags? Especially with the footage of the game showing he was ignoring vital information for your everyday life.
Raindrops keep falling on your head. A pretty pink toilet is about to fall on my head.
Because he wasn't good at playing the tutorial of a game that not only he's never played, but that most people haven't played because it's not even out yet? That's not even a groan. That's a summary of my entire reaction to this.
Oh, you understood that? Not a word.
What does that have to do with anything? Just because other people didn't play the game at the time, that doesn't prevent people from seeing Dean's gameplay. Nor does it stop people from seeing him ignore stuff on the game provided for him. This is kind of a non-sequitur argument, and for a video titled Bob We Trust, it's really bad to pull malicious arguments out of nowhere, Bob. Also, I realize this is after the fact, but in retrospect, now that the game is out, while it is hard, it shouldn't be that hard to get past the tutorial if you can read. Hell, I suck at the game and when I live streamed it, but I didn't get stuck on the tutorial.
But hey, your show, what do you think?
Well, I'm pretty much right there with you, Ivan. This is a dumb thing. There's hundreds of different types of video games, not everyone's good at all of them, and almost no one is good at any of them the first time. This is just such a stupid thing to decide to treat as a big deal. Though, to be fair, internet geek culture tends to think everything is a big deal, except, you know, things that are actually a big deal.
Alright, I agree with this. You're not going to be great at a new game. It does take time to get used to the controls and stuff, but you know what does help? Tutorials! Play the clip!
I can't stop laughing.
Nah, I just don't have my heart in it today. I got a bunch of things to do back in the ocean anyway.
Well, it's hardly worth it, but boo!
Do you understand?
In any case, the whole thing went viral in part because instead of treating this manufactured faux outrage as excuse for cyberbullying with the "you're all being dumb, piss off and welcome to my mute" button that it deserves, some folks actually tried to have a good faith discussion over the make-believe serious question supposedly at the heart of it. Do you have to be good at video games to be a good games journalist?
Okay, so playing devil's advocate, do you think there's at least some merit?
No. Just no. Game playing and writing competency are not interchangeable skill sets, and you don't need to be a master at something or even particularly good at it in order to cover it from a reporting perspective. What's needed is understanding of the matter, and to suggest otherwise is antithetical to a dozen different practical realities of journalism, in my opinion.
Hey, welcome back.
You jerk, that hurt!
Now that we've gotten back to the point I was talking about earlier, in some degree I do agree with that statement. I've used it myself in arguments, but the thing is you have to consider the medium in which it's used in. For example of cooking, you don't need to know how to cook to say something is bad, but then again it's more of a passive experience you're dealing with here. Unless there's a certain way to eat particular food, and in actuality there is for some foods, your actions don't really determine your experience with the food unless you decide to toss it onto the ground and eat it off the floor. Video games, however, hold interactive experiences with them, and player input is necessary in order to experience the game. Well, unless it's a walking simulator, or a visual novel, or a Telltale game. When it comes to the more gameplay-focused games like Cuphead, there needs to be at least a basic understanding of controls, mechanics, and the such. If, say, I don't know, and this is off the top of my head, if someone skips information in the tutorial or ignore it outright and goes out to play, then it falls onto them for not paying attention to the actual game as it gave you the tools to play. But that's just off the top of my head, and who knows if we'll ever find an example. Basically, when it comes to gaming, in my opinion, while I'm not expecting someone to be a pro gamer to write reviews and such, what I do expect is there to be a somewhat level of competency in the game. Because let's face it, yes, there are games that are broken out there. There are games who have controls that suck, but that's not all the games, and sometimes the reviewer does need to be considered for these sorts of things. And with how Dean has actually showed his past, he either needs to change his ways of playing the game, or at the very least learn that tutorials are there for a reason. And when it comes to game journalism, there is actually a need for this. If there is incompetency on the fault of the journalist, then that can actually affect the sales of the game. Like I said, I agree in concept you don't need to be a master of games in order to review them, but you need to at least be able to understand the game's mechanics or controls. It does take two to tango, and the player shouldn't put their own ineptitude onto a game. Once again though, that depends on context. You know the thing that you seem to be allergic to? If there's a glitch or the controls are way too out there, then that's understandable, but Cuphead?
Do you understand?
Like I said, there are many factors to this, but you're just glossing over that there does need to be competency in a medium that does require some level of effort on the person who does write the review. And Bob goes on to talk about context, when he ignores a lot of context to make his points.
Okay, but...
And even in this specific case, it's not like the guy said, I can't play this, which means it's badly designed, and called it his review.
Would I lie?
This was literally posted under the pretext of laugh at me being bad at this game.
Since, no, that wasn't the initial title. It was Cuphead Demo at Gamescom. It isn't easy. Not to mention, remember, there were criticisms that he did give out to the game. Once again, kind of raises red flags for me, and again, ignoring vital information.
And to the degree that you might argue that it was in some way potentially damaging to the game's reputation or a flippant unkindness to the developers, well, I don't agree with that, but the guy already more or less apologized for his tone or whatever, so if that was the hair across your ass, you can probably go ahead and wipe now.
Okay, but what if he had been doing a preview or a review?
Well, it's pretty safe to assume it wouldn't have been presented in exactly that way because the journo in question is a veteran professional and an adult. So it's kind of a pointless question, isn't it?
Yeah, I got nothing here.
But you don't think it's a big deal for someone who isn't good at games to be reviewing games?
I mean, okay, if the stated angle of the critic and or their outlet is specifically, these are reviews by elite, highly skilled game experts, then yes, obviously that's truth in advertising. But otherwise, I'm so much more concerned with their sentence structure and command of narrative grammar and their honesty than whether or not they can no-def DMC3 on Heaven or Hell.
Comparing a tutorial to an extremely hard game mode.
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
What gibberish! This makes no sense! And he's teaching you it?!
Knowing about movies is not analogous to being good at video games. That's two different things. And before you ask, same answer. If you're writing about games as an expert, you should be an expert, sure. But otherwise, still entirely context dependent.
Irony!
Especially since the whole you have to know X amount to write about Y thing angle tends to be gatekeeping code for I want you to have my background so you're more likely to share my largely already decided on opinion.
So wait, learning about basic controls is now gatekeeping? Apparently the bar just got lowered. Someone call James Cameron!
His name is James Cameron, the bravest pioneer. No budget too steep, no sea too deep. Who's that? It's him, James Cameron.
A pretty pink toilet is about to fall on my head.
Here.
Nah, games journalism is more like sports writing, if it's like anything. I mean, yeah, you need to understand American football to report on the NFL, but you don't really have to have a Super Bowl ring or even have played yourself at all to necessarily be any good at it. And when Hall of Famers do cross over into journalism, it tends to be on the broadcast side, often specializing in color commentary, because these are not the same skills.
What the hell does that have to do with anything? Wait. I had a point in the previous video that I did. Play that clip here instead. I'm too lazy to repeat it.
Critical logic
failure, Kuchera. The difference is that the mediums that you're talking about are passive, while video games are an active medium. Basically, it depends on the player's input and skill, and how much they're willing to put into it.
So what about, like, war reporting?
Well, now you're talking about, like, life and death and the ability to communicate and empathize with the experience of having put one's very existence on the line in service of a country or an ideal, and I'm not remotely comfortable comparing any of this to that.
How the hell did we end up here? Screw it, I'm done. Look, there's a lot wrong with this video, and frankly, I think it's rather weird that someone who's trying to be an intellectual is using a lot of fallacious arguments in it. What else is there to say? Yeah, that sounds about right. I'm Trash Common, and remember to examine your fandom.
I'm leaving. I can't deal with this.